RM Sotheby's is the world's largest collector car auction house by total sales. They are the preeminent market maker of high-quality collector cars and collections, regardless of size or complexity. By working in partnership with the Sotheby's team and its network of 80 offices in 40 countries, RM Sotheby's has established the largest client network of any collector car auction house in the world. Join the RM Sotheby's family by connecting with one of their car specialists at rmsotheby's.com or contact me directly at gstanley@rmsotheby's.com.
All right, welcome to the Collector Car Podcast. This is a little bit different. We're going back to a previous guest because he is such an expert in so many different things in the collector car automotive world. So, John, how are you doing today?
I am doing just fine, Greg. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being on again. If you would, give our listeners an update as far as what you do. I first got to know you through your articles for Sports Car Market, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm still practicing as a lawyer. Everybody asks me when I'm going to give it up. I don't know what they're trying to tell me, but I'm still at it. And I've been writing the legal files column in Sports Car Market magazine for, I don't know, it's over 20 years now. So I've kind of accumulated a bit of knowledge about how collector car stuff works. And it's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot, met a lot of really cool people, you included.
Thank you.
And here we are talking about our favorite things.
Yeah, no, that's great. And your article, yours and Steve's Ferrari articles, I always go to those two first because I'm a Ferrari judge. I know Steve really well. He's a fan of the podcast, which is real nice. And, yours is so fascinating because I think it's kind of like watching a crime show, like even like real life crime shows, because you're like, okay, how did they get themselves in that situation? How can I prevent myself from getting into that situation? And just so many fascinating aspects to the law. And then you're talking about cool cars on top of it. Is that kind of how you see, the popularity of what you do?
Yeah, in a nutshell, everybody relates to cars. The legal concepts are things that interest people. It's kind of like, Judge Judy's real popular and stuff. So people like legal mysteries and that sort of thing. And they kind of like the background stories, I think. And they learn things. And readers are always happy to learn something.
Yeah, and I think the one that I find most concerning is, and we're going to talk about Montana LLCs here and authenticity, but the ones I find really concerning is when you cover one of the restoration shop nightmares, where once that car went in there, you might not, horrible stories of you not seeing it either ever again or decades or, it's there, but I can't access it. Those are the ones that kind of scare me.
Yeah, they're tough because you're really vulnerable. Once the car gets torn apart, it's really hard to do anything. And there are so many, it keeps coming up in conversations I have with people. There's a lot of guys that run restoration shops that just really can't bring themselves to work. So they take the job, they tear the car apart. They just don't want to work on it. So it sits. They need the money, so they kind of bill you anyway. And
Right.
and that's a common refrain. It's really risky to send your car to a restoration shop far away. You need to be able to go in and check on it every now and then and stay in touch.
Yeah, I was fortunate. I found a really good place not far from me, like 6 miles from my house that specializes in Pontiac GTOs. And I found that unrestored one and it was going to be on Jay Leno's garage. And, I had that. I didn't need it because I totally trust the guy and he's a friend. But going into it, I'm like, all right, I have a deadline here. It's going to be on Jay Leno's garage on a certain date. And boy, did he overperformed. And I've come to learn since then it would have been whether or not it was on Jay Leno's garage or not. So those are the kind of restoration shops you want. Once you can trust, they're not going to lay down on you. They're going to keep going because you know what? They want the revenue. So they want a returning customer. They want to, this guy pays his bills. That's the guy I want, so.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times you think you have that and you turn out they have the kind I described.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Well, this could be a really long episode if we keep talking about other stuff that we didn't decide to talk about. So let's talk about the big topics here. Let's kick it off with Montana LLC. So now this has been quite a hot potato recently in the news. So if you would give me an overview of kind of what has how it traditionally has worked and some of the updates that are happening right now.
Okay. Well, it's funny. I mean, I've written about Montana LLCs. It's got to be 10, 12 times over 15 years, and they always spark some interest. But the last one I wrote was, last year I wrote a column about it, and it really came alive. I mean, we got um, our editor Jeff Sabatini says we have never gotten this many letters from people about anything we've had in the magazine before. It
Wow.
really kind of struck a chord. Uh, but so the idea behind a Montana LLC is that if it's a sales tax dodge, and it's also a way to correct other titling deficiencies. So Montana has a curious law. Uh, if you have an LLC that is formed in Montana, Montana law treats that LLC as being a Montana resident for vehicle registration purposes. So uh, that's what's so unique about Montana. It's the only state that does that. The state of organization makes it a resident. Now, you and I, you live in, say I live in Oregon. I'm an Oregon resident. If I had a vacation home in Palm Springs, California, and I bought a car and I left it there, I could title the car in Oregon because I own it and I live in Oregon. And I could drive it in California because I don't live there. So nobody would think anything unusual about that. That's the norm everywhere in the country. But Montana elevates it to that really odd point where if it's an LLC formed in Montana, it's treated just like, me as an Oregon resident. So if you want to, and Montana doesn't have any sales tax. So if you form an LLC and have it buy the car, you can title it in Montana. They'll give you license plates. They'll give you a title, and yeah, you're 100% legitimately titled. Um, and then you drive the car wherever you want to. The car never needs to go to Montana. So it's a big deal in California in particular, where a lot of guys will form a Montana LLC to buy the car, and they get plates and title, and they think they're fine. Well, they're not, because they're violating California law. As soon as you bring the car into California, you're required to title it in California. And when you do, they'll charge you a use tax, which is equal to the sales tax that you didn't pay. So they're violating law, and it's kind of an epidemic. But you could drive the car in the other 49 states. There's nothing wrong. If you title a car in Montana, you live in California, and you drive it in Kentucky, you're not violating anybody's law. But you just can't drive it in your home state. So that's the way it's supposed to work. And the most common use of this is to avoid paying the sales tax, which in California is around 10%. So it's, you buy a Ferrari, what they cost. 10% is a big number. So it's a lot of incentive to try to skirt around that. But you also have other problems. You buy an old car that you can't register because it doesn't meet emissions. You can use a Montana LLC, that kind of thing, or you got an imported car and you don't meet the safety standards for some reason, or some other problem. Those are less severe sins, but still you're still skirting the law. So what happened last year was this guy had a car in his garage. A California resident had a car in his garage that was titled in Montana, and the doorbell rang, and it was a state investigator and two county sheriffs with a warrant.
Whoa.
They had a warrant to search his garage and confiscate his cell phone.
Wow.
And they went to the garage and found his car with Montana plates on it, and they charged him with violating registration laws, which was a crime, and they were prosecuting him. So that was the subject of my article, and that was what really kind of lit the fire of interest, because this was a very concerted enforcement action on the part of the state of California, or maybe it wasn't. Uh, Nobody knew if this was some kind of coordinated enforcement operation or if it was just a rogue investigator that had an interest in this, and this was the only one. But later on, I heard that there had been some others that had been charged. So it was more than just a one-off.
Do you know what kind of Ferrari it was in that example?
Uh, it wasn't. I think it was an Aston.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because I had heard that a couple states are tougher on it than others. Like, it's not all of them are, strict like California, but California seems to be taking the lead. I would imagine just because there's millions and millions and millions of tax dollars they're missing out on. And I had heard that they had actually, you could get a reward if you turned in your neighbor and reported them for having a Montana tag. Had you heard that?
I've heard that. I've also heard that they don't need a reward. They turn people in just because they're pissed about it.
Well, that's true.
They pay their taxes and their neighbor doesn't, and he's got, a $500,000 Ferrari with Montana plates that he's driving around Bel Air, and people get pissed and they turn him in just because they want to.
Yeah, it's funny because I did have a sponsor for my podcast for a while that was in the Montana tag business, and I struggled with it because I'm like, well, is that tax evasion? I mean, when I think about it, I guess I referred more towards cruise ships, believe it or not. Cruise ships are registered in Denmark or something, even though they, like I don't understand the rules and all that, but I know part of it's tax to alleviate their taxes, but it also relates to where the ship is built. So it's a little bit different. I think if you register in the U.S., you have to have your ship built in the U.S. So it's not apples to apples, I guess is the best way to put it. So yeah, I kind of struggled with it because I'm like, well, it is legal in some states. I know some states are pushing against it. So it is interesting though. If you go to Cavallino Classic, a couple years ago, I took a picture just because I thought it was funny. I took a picture of like 12 Ferraris and they all had Montana tags, and I put them in a collage and I posted it on Instagram saying, wow, I didn't know there were so many Ferraris in Montana. So obviously.
Yeah. That's the highest concentration of Ferrari registrations in the country, I think. But, so this thing just exploded, and out of the blue, I got a call from a guy writing an article for doing an investigative piece for Bloomberg. His name was Michael Bologna, and he had seen my article and called me and wanted to talk about it. So I kind of coached him on how all this works and the ins and outs and everything. And then he and his other co-author uh, put a lot of effort into analyzing this and researching it, and they came up with all kinds of statistics about how many cars are registered in Montana. They've got, it's like 3 cars per resident on the average or something. It's some real out of scale number.
And the average value of those cars is 300 grand or something crazy.
Yeah. And so they wrote an excellent article about it. I think you can still find it on Bloomberg's website probably, and they alerted people to a lot of things, and they talked about a big enforcement action being taken by the state of Utah. They actually passed, the state government had the legislature pass a law that gave them authority to do all of this, and now they're hot and heavy after Montana registered cars that are in Utah. Now, who would think Utah would be a hotbed of sales tax avoidance? But apparently, it was a big deal to them. Then I, in reading that, looking at it, and all this, I ran across a great YouTube video that was done by a DMV investigator in Georgia they did they did a big investigative enforcement action on Montana registered cars in Georgia. And he says, you guys think you're under the radar or something, but it was so easy to catch people. They went to Montana's computers and got into their registration database, and they found all the uh, cars that were registered in Montana where the registration information, where the LLC information had a Georgia address. And so they made up a list, and they just started at the top and checked them off one by one, and they busted all kinds of people, and they gave them an opportunity to, fess up and pay their taxes and pay their penalties and not get charged with any crimes. And if they didn't do that, then they were going to go after them. So they caught some inordinate number of cars, and they had photos of all these Lamborghinis and Ferraris with Montana plates on the streets of Atlanta and stuff. It was really a cool video.
Well, I wonder if this is kind of thinking outside of the box here, but I wonder if, all this cracking down, all of a sudden you'll start seeing townhomes pop up in Montana. So it's like more legit. You figure $200,000 townhome and you're paying $1 million in taxes. Some people might go to the extreme. Who knows? But now in the phone calls and all the information or all the interest that came from your article, were they pro LLCs? Were they against LLCs? Like, what was the main theme of the letters you got?
We thought that we were going to get, well, first of all, we didn't think we were going to get this many letters. We thought they would be overwhelmingly car enthusiasts commenting on how the governments are just raping us all and beating up on car collectors. It turned out to be the opposite. It was 99% readers who were commenting about, boy, am I glad to read about this. It pisses me off that these guys are cheating and not paying their taxes, and they can afford to, and I pay mine, and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, right.
It was
okay.
Totally lopsided.
Really? That's fascinating.
No sympathy.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Interesting. Well, that's very interesting to hear that. So, okay. So where do you think this whole thing's going? Do you think California is actually really going to do some heavy-handed stuff like Utah, or do you think it's going to get loud for a while and then kind of dissipate?
So what the California effort was that they were really, they were happy to bust people like you and me that were skirting the law. But what they were really trying to do was get at some big dealers down there, because they believe. Wow. So California has a law that says that if you buy a car from a California car dealer, they are required to charge sales tax and remit it to the state, unless the car leaves California on a licensed common carrier transporter. So you need to have like reliable transport or something. Take your car out of state. It doesn't matter what state it goes to. It just needs to leave California. If you drive it on California streets after you own it, you have to, if you drive it off the lot, as soon as it touches the street, they have to charge sales tax. And if they don't collect the sales tax, then they've got to pay it. And the dealer can then go back to get it from you, but good luck with that. So they're on the hook for it if they don't collect it. And the theory is that there are dealers in California. Everybody always talks about Ferraris, but there are dealers in California that will tell their customers, look, if you, the sales tax on this is a lot of money. If you form a Montana LLC and ship it out of state. You don't have to pay the tax, and they'll hook them up with a transport company that's licensed and all of that, and they'll pick up the car, load it onto the transporter, give the dealer a receipt saying they're taking the car to Oregon. So the dealer is all protected. And they drive off, and instead of going north to Oregon, they take a left and drop it off at your house in Bel Air. Beverly Hills, and
Right.
that's the scam. So they think that there are dealers that are complicit in that kind of scheme, and that's what they're really trying to get at.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because I'm a rule follower, and growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, my dad was one that, hey, you got to pinch a penny anytime you can, and so he would do, cash car deals, and, maybe they sold the car for $8,000, but he maybe reported $5,000, just nothing major, just kind of just the way you kind of did stuff back then. And I kind of lean in the camp of I'm all for the dealerships doing the tax because it just takes it out of the consumer's hands, right? I remember going to the DMV, paying full tax on my 65 Mustang Fastback, and I don't remember what it was. It was like $3,600 or something. And a guy behind me was like, he couldn't believe I was paying the full tax. A customer behind me could not believe that I was paying the full tax on a car. And he was basically saying, man, I never do that, because everything he did was in cash, and he just kept as much as he could. And he was like, you're going to pay that? I'm like, well, that's what I owe, and it's a painful Band-Aid to rip off. You only have to do it once, but well, for each car, but so I'm all for having the dealers, you got to do it now, guy, let's just get it done.
Well, it's going to get worse for Montana. There's an organization called the Multi-State Tax Commission, which is an organization that all the various state tax agencies are members of, and they're looking at it, and they're reportedly working on some kind of a national policy about how to enforce the stuff. So 49 states are aware of Montana LLCs and what they're doing, and it's going to change. It's not just California.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move
Meanwhile,
on.
Montana's getting a lot of revenue out of this. They're just happy to just keep cashing the checks as long as they can.
Yeah.
They have no interest in changing their law.
Right. Now let's go to the second topic, authenticity. So this is one that you'd mentioned would be an interesting topic. So if you would kind of go into that a little bit, I do have a couple personal examples. But yeah, what do you mean by authenticity in from a legal perspective in the collector car world?
Well, there's a lot of it's a constant thing that comes up. You buy a car that's supposed to be a numbers matching car, and then you find out that the engine's not the right engine. It's worth what 20% less with the replacement engine than with the original engine in some cars. Maybe 25. So you overpay because the car's not authentic, and or then you find out that the cars are, it's kind of cobbled together. Like, you mentioned your GTO. How hard would it be to get a Pontiac Le Mans and put a GTO engine and put GTO badges all over it, and it'll look exactly the same as an authentic GTO? That's the GTO package was just an option on a Le Mans. So it's easy to convert, but the value difference is huge. So
what's interesting about GTOs I found out is 66, it came its own model, so it had its own VIN, but they didn't VIN stamp the engine blocks, but they did VIN stamp the transmission, which I thought was really kind of weird. I'm like, why don't you do the engine? And anyway, so yeah, you're right. Especially the 64s and 65s. I mean, those are really tough to document. To your point.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. So you have things like, you get into this philosophical thing. First of all, there's a legal part of it. Like, is this car a real car? Is it really VIN number, chassis number, such and such, or is it a fake? And then you've got the aesthetic part, the collectability part is how original is this car? So there's lots of instances where Ford GT350s that were totally trashed wind up getting rebodied. So how you rebody a GT350 is you find a fastback Mustang and you swap the chassis plates, and then you put all the GT350 bits into the regular Mustang body, and you say, well, it's still the same car, I just changed the body.
Yeah.
And you get into these philosophical discussions about, okay, well, what is the body? It's a unibody. So if I crash the front and replace the front fenders, it's still the same car. If I then get rear-ended, so I have to replace the rear quarter panels, it's still the same car. I get sideswiped, so I have to replace the doors, it's still the same car. Then I noticed that the floor pans all kind of rusted out, so I put a new floor pan in the car. It's still the same car, only none of it is the same.
It's like the old joke. This is Abraham Lincoln's axe. The handle's been replaced 3 times and the blade's been replaced 5 times, but it's his axe.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a tough, difficult thing. So, I work for RM Sotheby's, and I have to give them a ton of credit. I've seen cars that were not as advertised, and no matter how much documentation you do ahead of time, sometimes just stuff shows up and you're like, oh man, that's, and I've seen them pull cars from auction. I've seen them give them the boot when something comes to light that isn't legit, or they'll do an addendum. Like I had a car that, as it got shipped to the auction, it had a paint chip in the rear that wasn't like that for all the photography. So, we did an addendum, we announced it online, we did it on the podium, so that's a, cosmetic thing, obviously, but more serious situations, you got to boot it, because otherwise that goes to the credibility of the auction house. Obviously, at times, even the best of experts, I think it's the Jerry Seinfeld example, he had a speedster that was fooled the experts, for when he bought it. It wasn't until, I don't know, a couple years later that another shop, thought it was not authentic. And, that went through a bunch of legal ramifications, but it's tough. You really got to know your stuff, and you got to have someone on your side that can really look at it and say, is this legit or is it not,
Yeah. Seinfeld bought that car from a well-known California dealer who had the car in its inventory without the original engine, and then miraculously ran across the original 4-cam motor for the car, and reunited the engine with the car and sold it to Seinfeld. And then after a while, Seinfeld put it into an auction and sold it. And the buyer then looked into it and discovered that this really wasn't the engine that came with the car, and sued Seinfeld and the auction company. And the case got settled. Nobody will talk about what the settlement was, but the dealer that sold the car to Seinfeld had the car back in its inventory.
No.
And it was
at a reduced price.
Yeah. I think it was a little cheaper this time.
Yeah. It is really tough because I know of, like AC Cobras, you go to the CSX, the Shelby registry, and, you find, people have scoured through there finding a CSX number that nobody knows where it is. And all of a sudden it gets found. And I actually, know this of a car that's being rebuilt right now that was wrecked in 74, and it's the real deal, but there's another CSX number running around for the last 30 years. Yeah. And I have no doubt the one I've seen from 74 is the legit one, because I mean, you can just tell. But anyways, those are out there for sure.
So the most recent article I've written about this was about Porsche race car 910 chassis number 1. 001. There were two of them. Two cars that were both beautiful cars. Uh, really, really great looking cars. Both had serial number 001. And one of them went up for auction on Bring a Trailer. And it turned into quite the story. It was like the most interesting Bring a Trailer auction I've ever seen. It was kind of humming along real fine. And then some guy comments and says, wasn't this the 910 that was a no sale at, I think, at a Mecum auction at 1.3 a few months ago?
Oh, wow. Okay.
And turned out that it was. And then the story starts coming out, and a couple guys who from Europe who were really familiar with the car start commenting about how this is not the real car. The real car was owned by this other guy, and it's still around, and it's owned by this guy now. It's being restored, and he's going to be selling it. The owner of the one being sold, ranted and raved in response about how this is all BS. He had the title, he had the documents, he had history going back and all this. So I read through all these comments. It was like 400 comments or something. It was huge. Bring a Trailer had to backtrack a lot. They jumped in and said they extended the bidding because there were these questions. They changed the description to say that the car carried chassis number 1, that it took out the reference that it was chassis number 1, and pointed and then added a footnote that there's another car in Europe that claims to be chassis number 1. So the story is, I could piece it together, was really pretty interesting. It started, the car was owned by a guy named Linz, who was a Porsche factory works driver. And he crashed the car at Sebring. And the chassis was wrecked pretty badly. So he went to Porsche, and this is a new car. He just got the car and wrecked it. So I went to Porsche and said, "Hey, can I get another chassis?" And they said, "Sure." So they built him another chassis and stamped it chassis number 001, because that's the one he had. So he was just replacing the chassis. He took all the parts at the end and all the parts, put it into the replacement chassis, and then went back to racing it. And he had an Austrian title for chassis number 001, and the wreck chassis, don't know what he did with it. I think threw it away or left it someplace. So then he sells the car to another guy and gives him the Austrian title. And so you kind of wonder, is this title actually valid now? It's a title for chassis number 001.
Right.
And this car says it's 001, but the original 001 chassis is in the dump, so I don't know, nobody.
Well, there's 439 comments, and it was a no sale for $1.5 million approximately. So that makes it real tough, as you sort through this stuff. It's tough, so I guess the best advice is do as much diligent homework you can do ahead of time, right? I mean, it's, to protect yourself.
Yeah. Well, the guy that bought the car then sold it to a German.
Okay.
And he didn't need the Austrian title.
Oh, okay.
Because he could just title it in Germany. So he just sold the car to the German, and the German got a German title on the car without any problems, and the seller kept the Austrian papers because the new buyer didn't need them. Well, after that, sometime later, the guy found the chassis that had been wrecked and sold it and the Austrian papers
Uh,
to the guy that was selling the car and bring a trailer.
wow.
And
Okay.
and they put a correct engine, but not the original. You know, it was a different numbered engine, but it was the right engine. And they built the car. It's a beautiful car from the pictures, everything, and that's what he was trying to sell. And he owned this thing for 20 something years. Had a real good restoration shop build it. The other car, the one in the replacement chassis, was owned by an American guy who raced it everywhere, and everybody knew the car. And then it went back to an owner in Europe, and it's now being restored. So that was a conflict. These cars are supposedly worth like 2.5, and it no sale at 1.5.
Yep, 1.5. And so interesting question, like which one is the more valuable car? The
Yeah,
original
which one's yeah.
wrecked chassis without the drivetrain or, the reissued one? I guess the market will tell on that.
Well, which one would you rather have?
Yeah. I guess the
You
one
know?
with the better race history.
Well, yeah, that's the point. Yeah, really, because race cars, their value is really affected by their race history.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I own a race car, and I race it all the time. Nobody would pay any money for it because nobody gives a rip about me having raced a car. But if you've got, if it was, raced by Michael Schumacher, that's a whole different deal. So the history, the race history builds the provenance and creates the value. And the car with the replacement chassis is the one that had all the race history, but the car with the wrecked chassis was the original chassis. But these conflicts, this George Washington's axe thing, really comes to roost with race cars because they get wrecked.
Mm-hmm.
There's there's virtually there are hardly any race cars that were seriously raced and still have all their original parts.
Yeah.
They break. The engines blow and you replace the engine. You crash the car and you replace the chassis or you replace the frame. Pretty soon everything is different, but it all kind of uh, is still seen as the same car. But if you take a wrecked chassis that was raced and you build that into a perfect car, is that still the same car? Do you get to claim all of that racing provenance? That's not the thing that went around the
Yeah.
racetrack.
Right.
So everybody's got an opinion on this, and they're all entitled to them. Mine is that it matters who made the changes. If the famous race team that owned the car crashed it and replaced it and kept racing it, then no matter how much they changed, it's still the same car. But if they throw it away and then you and I find it and we replace all the same things and make it into a really nice car, it's not the same car.
Yeah.
Because we're not the guys who were racing the car in period. So that's kind of my sense of it. But everybody's entitled to a different opinion.
Yeah, I ran across a 1966 Mustang or Shelby GT350 carryover car, and actually very early, single digit VIN, and it had been raced. If you look it up in the registry, it was reskinned in different engine in 74, and it's sitting as it's raced in 79 with metal flared fenders, and it just looks absolutely stunning, wicked, cool. I'm like, all right, reskinned, wrong engine, or not the original engine. I'm like, maybe I could afford it, So I'm like all for it, and I want to touch a thing to that thing. It's as it was in 79. I would just get the dust off of it and get it up and running and take it out. So here's a trivia question for you. So I was involved in the Ferrari 330L M250 GTO that sold, and that's a fascinating one because it has two different lives. It lived its first life Has a 330 LM, 4-liter 4-speed, raced at Le Mans, failed at Le Mans, did not finish, got stuck in the sand. So failed race history. A year later, Ferrari redid it as a 250 GTO with a 3-liter 5-speed. The 4-liter had the beautiful 3D scoops. When it was made into a 250 GTO, it has an ugly mail slot nose. 3-liter 5-speed, successful hill climb. So, which would you rather have? The bigger engine, failed Le Mans racer, not a 250 GTO, or would you rather have the ugly front end nose, successful hill climb 250 GTO?
Depends on what you want it for.
Well, what would you want it for?
Well, I'm a driver. I don't I don't need I don't need expensive door stops.
Yeah. So
I
you
want
probably want
something.
the GTO then, because it has like a P3 engine in it. It's got the 5-speed. I mean, it is set up, would be my guess.
Yeah,
The 4-liter never ran great. So,
yeah. But if you want a piece of history, as Miles Collier talks about them, a historical artifact, then you want the ugly one.
yeah. Only one ever built that way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the history. So, but part of the problem is race cars are different. They're consumables. Um, uh, we all look at them the same way that we look at production cars, but we should, because they're just a thing.
Yeah.
When that car started out as a 330 and it got converted into a GTO or something, the factory did it, the race team did it, and it kept on racing. It's got this progression, and the car kind of morphed from one thing into another, and that's all part of its history. So that makes it, to me, it's a unique model. It's not it was a 330, it was a GTO, it was never both. It's the only
Right.
one that's did both. So
Yeah.
so you can change them around. Like Porsche used to change the tails on cars. They had a long tail and a Mary Stuart tail in the 917s. So,
Right.
you know, 911Rs. So they would change the tail to suit the racetrack that they were going to. So, which one's better? I don't know. The one that you might like one better than the other, but they were both the right tail at the right time.
Right. Yeah. Well, I told you we would have about a 25-minute conversation, and we're pushing 50. So, uh, you and
It
I
doesn't seem
can,
that long.
it's close to it. Yeah. Yeah. So you
Yeah,
and
you
I can
talk a lot. You
talk
really
about,
talk a lot.
you and I can talk cars and legal ramifications all day long. So, well, if some of my listeners would like to learn more about you and your practice, what's the best way to reach you?
You can, the easiest way is to email me, uh, john@draneaslaw.com.
Okay. I'll put that in the description here so someone can just click if they don't need your professional services. So, where are you off to next? What's your next car event?
My next car event is, I don't have that much. We've got the Rose Cup races here in Portland next weekend, not weekend after. So that's kind of a big race weekend for us. I'm in that. Then I'm going to the Formula One race at Austin later on in the year. I decided to go to Monterey, but I'd done nothing about finding a place to stay. So
Right.
I don't know if I'm going at this point. But
Yeah. Well, it behooves me to ask you, what do you race? And do you have another kind of classic car in your garage?
I've got I got 10 cars. I, they're all different. I've got a kind of a broad cross section of cars, mostly sports cars. I've got my race car though is a thing called a Spec Racer Ford, which is a purpose-built race car built by the Sports Car Club of America
Okay.
subsidiary, and it's Ford powered, tube frame, fiberglass body, open cockpit. Uh, the cars are spec. You can't change anything. The
Okay.
engines come sealed. You can't tweak them. Some guys cheat, but most don't. And it's all, theoretically, the cars are all the same, and it's just driver skill. But we get big fields. We'll get in the local race, we can get anywhere from like 20 to 30 cars. They're all pretty close. A 1 second lap time difference is 10 or 12 positions on the grid. So
Okay. Yeah.
really, really close. So it's good racing.
Now, of your 10 cars in your garage, which one gets the most use?
At the moment, it's my Lotus Emira.
Okay, so newer car.
Yeah, and that's why it gets all the use, because it's new.
AC.
That's my newest car, so it
nice.
gets used more than anything else. The car I bought before that was a C7 Corvette. That got the most use until the Emira came, and now so the newest car gets the most use.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Well,
But
as
it's
always,
kind of funny, I just walk out to the garage, and there's always one car that is just the right car to drive that day, and it's never the same one. It's just
that's good.
Weather, mood, destination, all that kind of stuff.
Well, as always, John, thanks for being on the Collector Car Podcast. I really appreciate it, and hopefully I'll have you on again in the future.
Yeah, happy to.